On this episode of the Carolina Sports Guy, talking Panthers training camp, folks. More is less. Before we get into today's content, make sure you pound that like button. Make sure you leave me some comments because you know folks will love the dialogue. Hit that bell notification to be notified of future content on videos like today on the Panthers, Carolina Hurricanes, Charlotte Hornets, and major college sports in both the North and South Carolina. And folks, whatever you do, subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. And I really, want to get the subscriptions up, folks. I see some people are watching and not subscribing yet. I enjoy doing this regardless of subscriptions, but I really would like to get my subscriptions up, folks. So, make this a good community to talk about Carolina sports. All right, folks. Surprising news yesterday that came out Sunday. By the time you probably get this, it might be late Tuesday. It's Monday right now. But the Carolina Panthers have waived guard David Moore. Now, the first thing I saw Austin Larkin, who was a defensive end, he played a little for us last year. He got nicked up, dinged up in practice, and I guess the Panthers reached an injury settlement with him. And I thought it was a position that, this is a guy that could have stuck on the roster, but basically might have been a practice squad guy. Somebody got hurt, put him off the practice squad. So I don't know how significant his injury is. They bring in another defensive lineman, but we bring in a safety. But to make room for the safety, we got rid of David Moore. Now, first thing, when I saw David Moore, I know how well our wide receivers are playing, and I think, man, now believe me, I knew it wasn't DJ Moore, but I thought it might have been the David Moore who should be our number 3 receiver, that maybe guys like Zylstra or Bayless or just a couple other guys might have surpassed him, and maybe they thought, they could kind of get rid of him. But I saw it was David Moore, the offensive guard from Grambling, the undrafted rookie. I was kind of shocked and stunned and a little upset at first because this was a guy I had targeted, like I said, the mid to late rounds. And when we picked him up as an undrafted free agent, I thought it was a win-win because right now Brady Christensen doesn't look like he's going to start. But definitely got to give him some time. But we definitely need him to really kind of pick up some and get better and maybe start by the end of the year or be a key reserve anyway in the cog of the offensive line. And, of course, I've heard some good things about Deonte Brown, the 6th-round guard from Alabama. And, hey, folks, I mean, you got to think about it. We got David Moore, and he was undrafted. So, you had a lot of other people that were picked in this draft and people skipped on him. I think somebody's going to pick him up and sign him. And if they don't, there's a good chance we could bring him back and put him on our practice squad maybe. But you got to look at this right now, folks. We've got a total of, let me count here real quick, 16 offensive linemen on this roster. So to cut David Moore, I mean, I did a video a while back on keeping 11 offensive linemen and maybe putting one on a practice squad, maybe 2. And I definitely had David Moore not just making the 53-man roster. I had him starting at guard and maybe being the key backup center to Paradis if Paradis goes down. And for him to, something he must have not impressed the coaches or he just wasn't picking up on the scheme. And you got to kind of hand it to some of the other guys on the roster fighting for a spot. They just might have outshined him. And this isn't a Thomas Fletcher move at long snapper where you get a guy and you spend a draft pick and you need him to work out and you got to give him a longer look. And if you cut him this early, looks pretty bad on your drafting. This is a guy nobody drafted and we got as an undrafted free agent. Now, if we'd have done this, like I said, the Deonte Brown 6th-round pick, people would have been screaming, well, man, Trey Smith was there. Or you got the guard from Tennessee that got picked up, I think maybe by Minnesota. But I look at this roster, and, guys like, I'm breaking it down to our Paradis and Tecklenberg look to be the centers. I think Tecklenberg playing at Baylor, it's kind of safe to say now he's probably going to make this roster. And my God, folks, if he doesn't, I hope somebody else can play backup center. But I say Tecklenberg, I had it early in the video that he was going to be our, practice squad. This guy may meet the 53-man roster now. Now, Trent Scott is an invaluable guy, and he played at Grambling State, and he can play guard and tackle. In fact, he can play all 4 positions. I think Trent Scott's definitely starting on this offensive line. But if there's somehow that 20%, like I said before, he doesn't, he's going to be probably the first guy off the bench to come in and relieve somebody. Looking at our guards, I definitely think that you got Deonte Brown now. You got Dennis Daly. Those look good, and John Miller and Pat Affleck. So with those guys, you got 4 strong guards and Trent Scott that can, in a pinch, play guard if he's not a tackle. So then you look at your tackles, you got Moten. You got Cam Irving, who I didn't think was going to make it, but maybe he's got that experience, and they felt pretty strong going in with him out there at tackle. And Brady Christensen, whether he starts or not, they're going to give him time. And then Greg Little. I haven't heard a whole lot about Greg Little, but maybe where he was drafted, you'd expect more out of him, although he's just in his 3rd year, than what you would get like a guy like David Moore. So like I said, less is more. But it just goes to show you, folks, no matter how early you do a prognostication of your 53-man roster or who's going to stick and not, it's kind of fun in games. But once we get in training camp and some of these guys just aren't up to par, or other guys are working their ass off, and we might not see it, and the coaches do. So this could be a good sign. It could be a bad sign. I've got guys that just could not believe they cut David Moore and Ivy Martez, a Matt Caskey, Monteiro, Mike Horton at guard, Panasuik, who basically was a defensive lineman converting. These are guys you think that they would have cut or let go before David Moore, but it wasn't to be. So you have to go from there. All right, I kind of wanted to look that Sam Darnold's still very looking confident, looking well, and him and Dan Arnold are picking up. Dan Arnold looks to be very good, folks. And I tell you, I'm going to give a shout out later in this video here, but I want to go ahead and the Mike Ritz podcast. He did a video, and he watched it. Does really good content, and he was at training camp, and he said, "Hey, that Dan Arnold reminds me of, or reminded him of a Jimmy Graham, his body style, being a basketball player." And I thought, man, I didn't think about that. That's a pretty good comparison. So I just wanted to put it out there that he's looking good. Hey, Ian Thomas, he might not be done yet, folks. We know Tommy Trimble's going to make this roster. And we don't even need a fullback. We can put him at fullback. He can play tight end. You got Dan Arnold as being your pass-catching tight end. You're hoping if you keep that 3rd tight end, it is Ian Thomas. And there's been days Ian Thomas has dropped some passes, and then there's Matt Rhule praising him, and he comes out and catches a nice touchdown pass and looks pretty good. So he's fighting for that job, and we're going to have to wait and see because it's got a couple more weeks to go before we're going to figure this out. Will Grier, I'd like to think it was just smoke and mirrors of P.J. Walker, but I think they're really giving Will Grier a solid look. And I've talked to some people, and some people have left comments saying, no way, P.J. Walker is going to be the second man because he played for Matt Rhule at Temple. And I hear you, and I believe it. But, man, the way they're pushing Grier, and he's been throwing he threw a couple touchdown passes Monday in training camp, but one of them was actually dropped, wasn't his fault, but he's been kind of on point. He might be guy number 2. Now, our running backs, CMC, he's going to be solid, and Hubbard's going to be the backup. And I put in the video, Trenton Cannon's going to be the 3rd guy, and they got him catching passes and special teams, but people are saying look out for Rodney Smith, that he's looked pretty good, and I don't think he can rule out Bonnafon, so we're going to have to wait to see. And don't even rule out Spencer Brown yet, folks, because he was kind of brought in and had some acclaim to him come out of UAB. Now, looks to me the days of Christian Miller could be numbered, and I feel bad because he didn't play last year with COVID, but he picked a terrible year to do it because you had a new coach in Matt Rhule coming in. He's not the one who drafted him. And now Herney's gone. So Christian Miller doesn't have any type of learning or a playing time or any type of assessment with this coaching staff. And, we keep adding players. And he could be on a chopping block because I'm not hearing his name a lot. And if he's not getting in these games, he could be like David Moore, and before you know it, he's going to be cut and gone. And he was a draft pick, so they're going to take a longer look at him. So we'll have to wait and see. And Frankie Luvu, I haven't seen a lot of him. He could be special teams out there and doing well. And, of course, this team kind of values him coming from the Jets, what he played. So we're going to have to see what we got in him. As far as wide receivers go, like I tell people, this C.J. Saunders kid is getting some recognition by Rhule. I don't know if he'll make it or not, but I really see a name, Omar Bayless. I just think this guy's somehow going to make this roster. If he doesn't, the only positive I can say is we've really got some excellent receivers, and he just couldn't crack it. I'm thinking it's going to be our best receivers by far. Injuries happen. Sometimes guys can let you down in the regular season. We don't know. And Bandon Zylstra, is anybody going to knock him off? Is he still going to maintain and stay on this roster? We're going to have to wait and see on that. Now, one thing I wanted to note, and this is where I want to get a shout out. If you do like my channel, shout out to a guy, Mike Rick's podcast. I watch him off and on when he does things. Does a great job. Of course, I'm a big supporter of the C3 podcast and Panther Nation podcast with Rashad and Dave. And there's a few other ones, Pantherology. But Mike Rick's podcast does a really good job. I like his excitement. He has his son involved a lot of times on his videos. But he had some really good insight. And it's things that I kind of knew and had heard through the grapevine and had kind of felt this way about him. But he just put the stamp on the letterhead, folks. Mike Rick said that he saw Matt Rhule coaching up his coaches in front of players. There's one thing when a coach is getting on players or telling players what to do or giving them praise, but when players watch the head coach getting on an assistant coach, and whether it be he's eating their ass out or whether he's giving them praise or just giving them instruction, but when he is coaching his coaches up, the players are going to respect that. If he's willing to drop in and scream at his coaches or more or less give that insight and intellect to his coaches on the field, the players are going to know, hey, this guy, he is the man in charge. And I think that's just, I didn't see that in Ron Rivera. And now Ron was a different kind of coach. I wasn't a fan. But Rivera was one that he kind of kept his mouth shut. He might have done a lot of his yelling and arguing behind closed doors of the locker room. Maybe his coaches to the side. Just a different way he did it. But I didn't always approve because a lot of times he used to say the same thing all the time. We left some plays on the field and all that shit. And just like John Fox used to say, it is what it is. Matt Rhule, I think, really just gets in there and gets his hands dirty. He has no problem getting on his coaches. And this is just something that Mike Ricks pointed out on his podcast. And it was just very reassuring. And I'm so glad we have a podcaster like that going out and informing us while he's there live at training camp, what's going on, and even staying in tune to what's going on with the coaches and how they're handling. Because I just think that's a very big positive. I think Matt Rhule, regardless of what people think, I think is an insightful coach, and I'm excited about the direction this team is taking with him. So, folks, with that being said, what do you think about today's video? How do you think the Panthers are progressing? Fan Fest, some other practices. We haven't really seen a whole lot. They've been playing close to the vest. So it's going to be interesting to see when these cuts start rolling down the line and we get our first preseason game coming up this Sunday against the Colts, how we fare. So make sure you pound that like button. Leave me some comments. I love the dialogue. Pound that bell notification to be notified of future videos like these. And by all means, folks, subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. And we will see you next time on another edition Carolina Sports Guy.